The massive alien ship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star, its hull gleaming with an otherworldly sheen that made the assembled crowds shield their eyes. News cameras from around the world focused on the landing site in Geneva, where humanity would meet its first confirmed alien visitors. The excitement was palpable, mixed with an undercurrent of fear that rippled through the global population. Ambassador Kekstar emerged from the ship with deliberate slowness, his towering form casting long shadows across the landing platform. His scaled hide caught the sunlight in prismatic flashes, and his three eyes moved independently as they surveyed the gathered humans. Each step he took seemed calculated to demonstrate his superiority over these primitive beings who had barely begun to explore their own solar system. The Terran delegation waited in the specially constructed meeting hall, their faces carefully neutral despite the magnitude of the moment. Dr. Kim? Hannah sat at the center of the human representatives, her hands folded calmly on the polished table. To her left, Park Jinu adjusted his glasses nervously, while Lee Sora maintained her diplomatic composure despite the tension in her shoulders. Choi Min-ho, the military advisor, sat rigid in his chair, his eyes never leaving the alien ambassador as he entered the room. Kekstar's presence filled the space with an almost oppressive weight. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his reptilian features both alien and oddly familiar. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of a being who had never been challenged, never been denied what he demanded. The translation device on his chest rendered his words into perfect English. Though the tone remained unmistakably condescending, "People of Earth," he began, his three eyes focusing on different members of the delegation simultaneously. "I bring greetings from the Velthari Empire. Your small world has been observed, catalogued, and found suitable for our purposes. Come not as conquerors, but as benefactors, offering you a place in our great civilization." The assembled humans listened in silence as Kekstar outlined the terms of what he clearly considered a generous offer. Earth would be incorporated into the Empire's vast network of worlds. The human population would be relocated to designated colonies where they would serve as laborers and support staff for the Empire's continued expansion. In return, humanity would receive protection, advanced technology, and the privilege of serving a civilization that had successfully conquered over 300 worlds. "Your resistance would be futile," Kekstar continued, his middle eye fixing on Hannah with what might have been pity. "We have studied your world extensively. Your weapons are primitive, your defenses laughable, your people fight among themselves over trivial matters while remaining ignorant of the greater universe around them. We offer you the chance to transcend your limitations and serve a higher purpose." The silence that followed was deafening. Camera crews held their breath as the fate of humanity hung in the balance. World leaders watching from their respective capitals waited for Earth's response to this ultimatum disguised as an offer. In living rooms across the globe, families gathered around their screens, uncertain whether they were witnessing humanity's salvation or its doom. Dr. Hannah remained perfectly still throughout the ambassador's speech, her expression never changing. She had been chosen for this role not just for her diplomatic skills, but for her ability to remain calm under pressure. Behind her composed exterior, her mind was racing through calculations and contingencies that had been prepared for this exact scenario. When Kekstar finally finished speaking, the room remained silent for what felt like an eternity. The alien ambassador's three eyes watched the humans expectantly, clearly anticipating their grateful acceptance of his empire's generous terms. He had delivered similar ultimatums to hundreds of worlds, and the response was always the same: submission, followed by integration into the Empire's vast machine of conquest. Park Jinu shifted slightly in his chair, his hand moving almost imperceptibly toward the briefcase at his feet. Lee Sora's breathing remained steady, but her fingers tapped once against the table's surface. Choi Min-ho's military bearing never wavered, though his eyes briefly met Hannah's in a look that conveyed volumes of unspoken communication. Finally, Dr. Hannah spoke. Her voice was quiet, almost conversational, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the fate of her entire species. "Ambassador Kekstar," she said, her words carrying clearly through the hushed room, "we appreciate your offer and the time you have taken to present it to us. The alien ambassador's scaled features arranged themselves into what might have been a smile. His three eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture that his species used to indicate satisfaction. He had expected this response, this acknowledgement of his empire's superiority and the humans' acceptance of their fate. However, Hannah continued, her tone never changing. We must respectfully decline. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Kekstar's three eyes suddenly focused on Hannah with laser intensity. His scaled hide shifting colors slightly as his internal temperature rose.
Oh.
No species had ever declined the Empire's generous offer. The concept was so foreign to his experience that he initially wondered if the translation device had malfunctioned. You decline, he repeated, his voice carrying a note of disbelief that transcended species barriers. We decline, Hannah confirmed simply, her calm demeanor never wavering in the face of the alien's growing agitation. Fleet Admiral Rexmol's claws scraped against the metallic surface of his command throne as he read the intelligence report for the third time. The scaled warrior's forearms moved in agitated patterns, a clear sign of his growing frustration. Around him, the bridge of the Imperial flagship hummed with activity as junior officers tried to make sense of the impossible data streaming in. From the outer rim of the human solar system, 12 ships, Rexmol growled, his voice echoing through the vast command center. 12 of our finest scout vessels, destroyed by primitives who still use chemical rockets to reach their own moon. His subordinates remained silent, knowing, better than to interrupt their commander when his temper was rising. The Admiral's reputation for dealing with failure was well known throughout the fleet. The report detailed the complete destruction of the advance. Reconnaissance force that had been sent to confirm Earth's military capabilities. What should have been a routine scanning mission had turned into a massacre. The scout ships had been approaching Earth's orbital space when they simply ceased to exist. No warning, no distress calls, no energy signatures that matched any known weapon system in the Empire's vast database. Captain Thylex, the Admiral's chief tactical officer, finally broke the tense silence. Sir, our intelligence suggests the humans used what they call kinetic projectiles, simple chunks of metal accelerated to high speeds. The captain's voice carried a note of uncertainty that made Rexmol's eyes narrow dangerously. Kinetic projectiles? Rexmol's laugh was a harsh sound that made several bridge officers flinch. These creatures barely understand the basic principles of space travel. And you're telling me they destroyed our ships with metal rocks? He stood from his throne, his massive frame casting shadows across the bridge. Their most advanced spacecraft take months to travel between their planet and its moon. They have no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no faster-than-light communication systems. The Admiral moved to the massive tactical display that dominated the center of the bridge. The holographic representation of the human solar system rotated, slowly showing the primitive colonies on Mars and a few asteroid mining stations scattered throughout the system. It was a pathetic display of technological achievement compared to the Empire's vast network of conquered worlds. Perhaps Rexmol said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. These humans need a proper demonstration of what real civilization looks like. He turned to his communications officer. I'll send word to Battle Group Omega. They are to proceed to the human system immediately and show these primitives the consequences of refusing the Empire's generosity. Battle Group Omega was the pride of the Imperial fleet. 200 of the Empire's most advanced warships, each capable of destroying entire cities with a single blast from their primary weapons. The group included heavy cruisers with armor, plating that could withstand direct hits from plasma cannons, fast attack ships with cloaking technology that made them nearly invisible, and massive dreadnoughts carrying enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. The human system seemed laughably defenseless as Battle Group Omega emerged from hyperspace. Earth's orbital defenses consisted of a few small space stations and what appeared to be modified cargo ships patrolling the outer planets. The human fleet, such as it was, made no move to intercept the approaching Imperial vessels. Instead, they seemed to be retreating toward the inner system, their crude engines leaving bright trails against the starfield. Admiral Rexmol watched the tactical display with satisfaction as his forces moved into attack formation. The humans were finally showing proper respect for Imperial might. Their retreat proved that they understood the futility of resistance when faced with superior technology in overwhelming numbers. "Begin the demonstration," Rexmol commanded. "Target their orbital installations first. Show them what happens when primitives challenge the Empire." The first wave of Imperial ships moved forward, their weapon systems charging for what should have been a simple destruction of human infrastructure. The crew members on the bridge watched with professional interest as their forces closed the distance to their targets. This would be recorded and broadcast throughout the Empire as another example of successful pacification. Then space itself seemed to come alive with death. The void around the Imperial fleet suddenly filled with what looked like a metal storm. Millions of tiny objects, each no larger than a human fist, streaked through space at impossible speeds. They moved so fast that they appeared as streaks of light on the tactical displays, creating a deadly web that enveloped the entire battle. Group Omega, the first Imperial ship to be hit, simply vanished. One moment it was there, a massive dreadnought bristling with weapons and armor. The next it was an expanding cloud of superheated gas and twisted metal. The projectiles struck with such force that they converted matter directly into energy, creating miniature suns that briefly outshone the local star. Rexmol watched in horror as his fleet was systematically destroyed. Ships that had conquered dozens of worlds were being torn apart by what appeared to be simple chunks of metal, moving at velocities that should have been impossible for such primitive technology. The humans had somehow accelerated these projectiles, 2 significant fractions of light speed, turning them into weapons more devastating than anything in the Empire's arsenal. "Impossible," Rexmol whispered, his forearms trembling as he watched 2 centuries of Imperial naval might being reduced to expanding clouds of plasma. How did they do this? The answer came from his science officer, her voice filled with disbelief. "Sir, our sensors indicate these projectiles originated from the asteroid mining stations. They've somehow converted their industrial equipment into massive acceleration devices. Great. They're using their entire mining operation as a weapon system." Less than 10 minutes, Battle Group Omega ceased to exist. Not a single Imperial vessel survived the metal storm that had erupted from seemingly empty space. The humans had taken their crude mining equipment and turned it into the most efficient mass destruction system the galaxy had ever seen. Rexmol stared at the tactical display, watching the last traces of his fleet fade into the cosmic background. The primitives had just taught the Empire a lesson about the dangers of underestimation. The emergency council chamber on the Velthari homeworld buzzed with nervous energy as reports flooded in. From across the Empire, High Chancellor Vexera Scales had turned a sickly pale color, clear sign of the stress that was consuming the Empire's leadership. The holographic displays around the chamber showed a disturbing pattern that no one had anticipated. Trade. Routes going dark, entire sectors becoming no-fly zones, and ships simply vanishing without trace. 200 ships, muttered Defense Minister Kalrex, his voice barely above a whisper. Battle Group Omega was our finest fleet, and these humans destroyed it in minutes. The assembled officials shifted uncomfortably in their seats as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Never in the Empire's 3,000-year history had a single primitive world managed to inflict such devastating losses on their military forces. The most disturbing reports came from the outer territories. Imperial cargo ships, attempting to pass through the human-controlled regions of space, were disappearing without warning. Long-range sensors detected no enemy vessels, no energy signatures, no signs of battle. The ships would be there one moment, transmitting routine status updates, and gone the next. It was as if space itself had become hostile in the areas surrounding the human solar system. Captain Morthic, one of the few survivors from the initial scout missions, stood before the council with visible tremors in his limbs. "Done something we never thought possible," he reported, his voice shaking. "They have turned empty space into a weapon. Our ships are being destroyed by objects we cannot even detect until it's too late." The implications were staggering. The Empire's entire structure depended on safe passage through space. Trade routes that had been used for millennia were now death traps. Supply lines to frontier worlds were cut off. The economic backbone of the empire was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Meanwhile, billions of light years away, Earth was undergoing a transformation that would have shocked the Imperial observers if they had been able to witness it. The planet that the Empire had dismissed as a primitive backwater was revealing its true nature. What the aliens had mistaken for weakness was actually a carefully maintained facade, hiding humanity's greatest strength, their ability to adapt and weaponize anything when faced with extinction. Commander Yoon Do-yeon stood in the Central Command bunker deep beneath the Korean peninsula, watching as status reports flowed in from every corner of the globe. The screens around him displayed a planet at war, but not the kind of chaotic conflict the Empire expected from primitive civilizations. This was organized, systematic, and terrifyingly efficient. Sector 7 reports full conversion complete, announced Lieutenant Park Min-seo from her station. All civilian factories in the region are now producing ammunition for the orbital defense platforms. The speed of the transformation was breathtaking. In less than a week, humanity had converted its entire industrial capacity from peaceful production to military manufacturing. The automobile factories that had once produced millions of cars were now churning out components for kinetic weapons. The steel mills that had built skyscrapers were forging armor plating for defensive installations. Even the toy factories had been retooled to produce guidance systems for the metal projectiles that were proving so effective against Imperial ships. Engineer Shin Nara emerged from the depths of the command center, her face streaked with grease and exhaustion. She'd been working non-stop since the alien ultimatum, coordinating the rapid militarization of Earth's infrastructure. The asteroid mining stations are operating at maximum capacity, she reported to Commander Yoon. We're producing 10 times more kinetic projectiles than we did before the war started. But the real surprise was the human population itself. The Empire had expected panic, chaos, and the breakdown of civilization when faced with superior alien technology. Instead, they found a species that had been preparing for this moment without even knowing it. Every human civilian had received basic military training during their education. Every city had been designed with defense in mind. Every factory could be converted to military production within days. The transformation was visible from space. Satellites that had once been used for communication and weather monitoring were now part of an integrated defense network. The International Space Station had been converted into a weapons platform. Even the civilian ships that traveled between Earth and Mars were now armed with kinetic weapons that could destroy vessels 100 times their size. Dr. Kim Hanna, now serving as Earth's Minister of Alien Affairs, stood on the observation deck of the orbital command station, watching as another wave of human-built projectiles streaked toward the outer system. The aliens had made a fundamental error in their assessment of humanity. They had seen the division, the conflicts, the apparent chaos of human civilization, and assumed it meant weakness. What they had failed to understand was that humans were dangerous precisely because they were so good at fighting each other. Every war, every conflict, every military innovation in human history had been preparation for this moment. The species that had turned warfare into an art form was now focused on a single enemy. And the results were devastating. The reports from the Empire's core worlds confirmed what the humans had hoped. Panic was spreading through the alien civilization, trade routes were abandoned, frontier worlds were cut off from supplies, and the military was struggling to understand an enemy that fought unlike anything they had encountered before. Space itself had become humanity's ally, filled with invisible death that struck without warning. The Empire was learning that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one you had underestimated. Emperor Vextel had ruled the Velthari Empire for over 2 centuries, conquering worlds and civilizations with methodical precision, never in his long reign had he faced a challenge that required his personal attention. The loss of Battle Group Omega had shaken the Empire to its core. The Emperor refused to believe that a primitive world could threaten his vast domain. He would lead the Grand Armada himself and crush these upstart humans once and for all. The preparation took months. 10,000 ships gathered at the Empire's primary naval base, representing the combined might of 300 conquered worlds. Massive dreadnoughts capable of cracking planets floated alongside swift attack cruisers and heavily armored battleships. The fleet stretched across space for hundreds of kilometers, a sight that had brought dozens of civilizations to their knees. Without firing a single shot? "Today we end this embarrassment," Emperor Vextal declared from the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. The massive vessel was a kilometer long and bristled with weapons that could reduce entire cities to ash. Around him, his most trusted commanders nodded in agreement, their confidence restored by the overwhelming display of imperial power surrounding them. The journey to the human system took several weeks, during which the Emperor received disturbing reports from the frontier. More ships were disappearing, entire sectors had been declared off-limits to civilian traffic, and panic was spreading through the outer colonies. But all of that would end when the Grand Armada demonstrated the true power of the Empire. No primitive world could stand against such overwhelming force as the fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the human solar system. Emperor Vextal expected to see the pathetic defensive efforts of a desperate world. Instead, he found something that made his blood run cold. The humans were waiting for them with a fleet that should not have existed. Hundreds of massive ships hung in space like sleeping giants, their hulls scarred and pitted from what appeared to be countless impacts. These were not the crude vessels the Empire's intelligence had described. These were warships built for one purpose: to destroy anything that threatened their world. The human fleet was outnumbered 20-1, but something about their formation made even the Emperor's most experienced commanders nervous. Captain Lim Ji-hoon stood on the bridge of the human flagship, watching as the alien armada deployed into attack formation. His ship, the Soul's Fury, was one of the largest vessels humanity had ever built. Its hull was scarred from the asteroid impacts that had provided the raw materials for its construction, and its weapon systems were unlike anything in the galaxy. Instead of energy weapons, the ship carried kinetic cannons that could fire projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. "All ships, prepare for engagement," Captain Lim broadcast to the human fleet. "Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for the right to exist as a free species." The response from the other human captains was immediate and determined. They had trained for this moment, knowing that failure meant the end of human civilization. The battle began with a massive barrage from the Imperial fleet. Thousands of energy beams and plasma bolts streaked across space, lighting up the void with deadly fire. The human ships responded not with similar weapons, but with storms of metal projectiles that moved so fast they appeared as streaks of light. The difference in approach was immediately apparent. Where the alien weapons created spectacular displays of energy, the human projectiles simply erased their targets from existence. Admiral Song Yuri commanded the battle from the massive defense, a platform that had been constructed in the asteroid belt. The platform was disguised as a mining station, but it was actually the largest weapon ever built by human hands. Its main cannon could accelerate projectiles to 20% of light speed, turning even small chunks of metal into planet-killing weapons. "Target the Imperial flagship," Admiral Song ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos of battle raging around her. "All platforms coordinate fire on the Emperor's ship." The response was immediate. A dozen hidden platforms throughout the solar system began tracking the Eternal Dominion, preparing to unleash concentrated fire on the symbol of Imperial power. The battle raged for weeks, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The Imperial fleet had superior numbers and more advanced technology, but the humans fought with a desperation and efficiency that shocked the alien commanders. For every human ship destroyed, 10 Imperial vessels were reduced to expanding clouds of plasma. The aliens' energy shields, designed to deflect similar energy weapons, were useless against the kinetic projectiles that simply punched through them at relativistic speeds. Emperor Vextal watched in growing horror as his Grand Armada was slowly ground down by the human forces. Ships that had conquered entire star systems were being destroyed by what appeared to be simple chunks of metal fired from crude cannons. The humans had taken the most basic principle of warfare and perfected it beyond anything the Empire had imagined possible. The end came when Colonel Kang Tajan, led a boarding assault on the Imperial flagship. The human colonel and his team had launched themselves in small, fast ships that were little more than armored pods with engines. They moved too quickly for the Eternal Dominion's defensive systems to track, and they struck the massive ship like a swarm of angry insects. The boarding action was brief, but decisive. The human soldiers fought with a ferocity that the Imperial crew had never encountered. They used weapons that fired the same kinetic projectiles as their ships, but on a smaller scale. The Emperor's elite guards, trained in energy weapon combat, were helpless against opponents who fought with what appeared to be advanced versions of primitive firearms. When the Eternal Dominion finally exploded, taking Emperor Vexthel with it, the remaining ships of the Grand Armada fled into the void. The survivors carried with them the knowledge that the Empire had met its match in the humans of Earth. The news of Emperor Vexthel's death spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Carried by the few survivors of the Grand Armada who had witnessed the impossible, the Velthari Empire, which had seemed unshakable for 3,000 years, began to crumble within days of the Emperor's flagship exploding in the void. Without their supreme leader, and with their most powerful fleet destroyed, the Empire's iron grip on its conquered world started to slip. On the industrial world of Cathari Prime, the enslaved population had labored for centuries in the Empire's vast factories. When word reached them that humans had destroyed the Emperor himself, something stirred in their hearts that had been dormant for generations. The factory foreman, a cruel Velthari overseer named Korth, found himself facing a work stoppage that quickly turned into open rebellion. "The humans did it," whispered Victor, an elderly Cathari worker whose back was bent from decades of forced labor. "They destroyed the Grand Armada. They killed the Emperor." The words spread through the factory like electricity, igniting a spark of hope that had been carefully suppressed by centuries of oppression. Similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds. Species that had been conquered and enslaved began to remember what freedom felt like. The Velthari had ruled through fear and overwhelming force, but their military might had been shattered by a single primitive world. If humans could defeat the Empire's greatest fleet, perhaps rebellion was not hopeless after all. The Zephyrian colonies were the first to declare independence. These proud warrior people had been among the Empire's most recent conquests, and their spirit had not been completely broken. When their leader, War Chief Thaxrin, received confirmation that the Emperor was dead, he immediately began coordinating attacks on Velthari outposts throughout their territory. "The humans have shown us the way," Thaxrin declared to his assembled warriors. "They proved that the Empire can bleed, that their ships can be destroyed, that their leaders can die. If a species we had never heard of can defeat them, then we can reclaim our freedom." The rebellion spread like a plague through the Empire's territory. On Nexus 7, the slave miners used their mining equipment to attack the Velthari garrison, inspired by reports of how humans had weaponized their own industrial machinery. The amphibious Qualthic used their knowledge of underwater warfare to destroy Imperial naval bases on their ocean world. Even the peaceful Zendari, who had submitted to the Empire without resistance, began passive resistance campaigns that crippled the Imperial administration. The Velthari military, already weakened by their catastrophic losses in the human system, found themselves fighting on hundreds of fronts simultaneously. Their remaining ships were scattered across the galaxy, trying to maintain control of rebellious worlds while dealing with the psychological trauma of their defeat. Many Imperial officers simply abandoned their posts, unable to comprehend how. Their invincible empire had been brought low by a species that had barely mastered space travel. Within a year, the empire had fractured into dozens of independent territories. Former Imperial worlds declared themselves free republics, while others fell into chaos as different factions fought for control. The Velthari homeworld itself became isolated, cut off from its colonies, and struggling to maintain order as refugees. And defeated soldiers returned with tales of human military superiority. Ambassador Kim Hanna stood in what had once been the throne room of the Imperial Palace, now converted into a memorial for the victims of Velthari conquest. The massive chamber was filled with exhibits documenting the Empire's 3,000-year history of oppression, serving as a reminder of what unchecked power could accomplish. Delegations from dozens of former Imperial worlds had come to pay their respects and to thank humanity for inspiring their liberation. "It's strange," she said to her companion, Colonel King Tajan, who had led the boarding assault on the Emperor's flagship. "They keep thanking us for freeing them, but we were just defending ourselves. We never intended to liberate the galaxy." Kong nodded, his weathered face reflecting the weight of what they had accomplished. Maybe that's what made the difference. "We weren't trying to conquer anyone, we just refused to surrender." He gestured at the exhibits around them, showing the artifacts of fallen civilizations that had been absorbed into the Empire. All these worlds fought back at some point, but they were fighting alone. We showed them that the Empire could be defeated. The transformation of the galaxy had been swift and dramatic. Trade routes that had been controlled by the Empire for millennia became open to all species. Technologies that had been restricted to the Velthari were shared freely among the former colonies. Art, culture, and science flourished as suppressed civilizations rediscovered their heritage. Dr. Shin Nara, now serving as Earth's Minister of Galactic Affairs, joined them in the memorial chamber. "The final reports are in," she announced. "Last Velthari stronghold has surrendered. The Empire is officially dissolved." The words carried a weight that seemed to settle over the chamber like a blanket. As they walked through the ruins of Imperial power, Hannah reflected on the lesson. That had cost the Velthari everything. The Empire had seen Earth as a sleeping giant and had chosen to wake it. They had mistaken humanity's internal conflicts for weakness, not realizing that a species that had spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of warfare would be uniquely dangerous when unified against a common threat, the galaxy. Would remember the Velthari Empire as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the mightiest civilization could fall if it underestimated the power of a species fighting for its very survival. Earth had never been powerless. It had simply been waiting for a reason to show the universe what humans could accomplish. When they stopped fighting each other and started fighting together,